Welcome, if this is your first time watching Who Remembers, the series where we discuss and break down my thoughts on games that are at least 10 years old or older. Some we are revisiting, and some we are playing for the first time. I'll try to keep it mostly spoiler-free by avoiding any major plot points. So let's get started. One of my favorite things to do as a kid was to draw comic book characters, especially at my dad's house. He didn't have cable, so looking back, I guess he was ahead of the times, since no one has cable anymore. Although I remember getting to watch the morning cartoons with the X-Men, when I really think about where I discovered the X-Men, it was the comic books. So now that we have XMen 97, which is incredible and inspired me to make this video, the nostalgia from XMen 97 has hit me like a lead pipe. It's so damn good. After watching the first few episodes, I got my ass off the couch, walked it right over to my modded Xbox. Knew I'd find some goodies on there because there was the arcade and the emulators already installed. And what I found was a decent amount of X-Men games. And there's so many to talk about, honestly. But today I'm going to highlight 7 of them that I grew up with. It makes sense to me to start with the 3 arcade games that I played, because as a kid, these are the first ones I remember encountering. Number 1 is the XMen Arcade game from 1992. This is a banger, and my second favorite X-Men game to revisit, still to this day. The music, the gameplay, the cutscenes, it's all very special.
X-Men.
In terms of that classic arcade style beat 'em up, XMen Arcade is elite. It feels just right when you play it. The cast of playable characters is almost perfect, outside of missing Gambit. Having Nightcrawler is always a plus though. Most of your favorite villains are here to battle as well. I remember consistently making it to the Blob and not having enough quarters to defeat him. This was so frustrating as a kid, because I just wanted to keep playing and progressing in this game. But anyways, that's the beauty of an emulator, honestly. And this is where I'm an advocate for it.
Nightcrawler.
The combat is the true standout with the X-Men Arcade. This is why I continue to revisit this game year after year. Next we have some fighting games. X-Men Children of the Atom and X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Now, I'll be completely honest with you, I'm not a huge fighting fan, but both of these arcade fighting games are absolute classics. The gameplay is solid for both games. I slightly prefer X-Men vs. Street Fighter just because of the selectable characters. I mean, let's be honest, I'm just a little more familiar with the Street Fighters and their moveset than some of the characters in Children of the Atom.
X-Men versus Street Fighter.
Children of the Atom is more of a 1v1 format, while vs. Street Fighter is more of a tag team element. I suck at both, but combos aren't too difficult to figure out, but I would recommend, checking out both of these based on which flavor you prefer. Before we move on to a few console X-Men games, I just want to say I really appreciated this era of X-Men games with the arcades. It was such a wonderful experience as a kid growing up, and each time I went to the arcade, this was probably one of the franchises I kind of naturally gravitated to when I walked into the arcade. It was either probably the X-Men 92 arcade game or the Ninja Turtles game. Those were the two I kind of gravitated to the most, outside of like Hydro Thunder or maybe some other kind of racing game. The first X-Men game I remember playing for the console was X-Men Apocalypse for the Super Nintendo. I remember my dad having 3 games for the Super Nintendo, and me and my brothers would kind of rotate through them, and the games were Super Mario World, absolute banger, you gotta have that one. I'm pretty sure we had the console bundle. And then underrated one, American Gladiators, pretty fun multiplayer game or co-op. And then of course X-Men Apocalypse. All 3 games were pretty solid options to have and grow up with, but Apocalypse was my favorite X-Men game and still is my favorite X-Men game of all time. It has carried over and maintained that arcadey feel that I love from the X-Men 92 arcade, but has its own style and vibe about it. Gambit is included this time, which is incredible, and Beast as well. So, can't go wrong there. Plus, Nightcrawler is unlockable, I think. One of the main reasons I prefer Apocalypse over the Genesis games is the fact that each character has their own level to play, compared to other titles where you basically play the same level, just with different characters each time. I also enjoy how each character is stylized and has a real comic book feel to it. I highly recommend X-Men Apocalypse to anyone who enjoys retro, 2D side-scrolling beat-em-ups with some platforming elements and light puzzle solving. Shortly after, sometime in the mid-90s, I was handed down a Sega Genesis by my stepdad, Keith. He was a huge Sega fan and recently upgraded to a Sega CD. So this is where my X-Men journey continued with X-Men 1 and X-Men 2, The Clone Wars. 1993 introduced X-Men to the Sega Genesis. Very similar to Apocalypse, but kind of a slight downgrade in many ways. First being there's only 4 playable characters: Gambit, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Cyclops. Limited but very solid lineup. X-Men for the Genesis had a pretty gritty feel to it compared to the Super Nintendo version. X-Men 1 is no doubt a classic, but has one glaring flaw for me personally. It's the stamina bar for your special abilities. I mean, let's be honest about the whole reason why we play any X-Men game is to use each character's special abilities. I mean, it's the best part, hands down. X-Men 2 corrected this gameplay element, and it's what I prefer 90% of the time. It's nice to use your special abilities as much as you'd like to. And as I mentioned before, both Genesis titles makes you play through the same level with each character. It's fine, but I prefer how each character has their own path in the Super Nintendo version. It makes it more interesting and enjoyable. I do like how there is some strategy though in picking which X-Men character you want to play as first, because you might want to save some of your better characters for last when you get to a harder level or maybe even a boss fight. All in all, I know these games are very similar in a lot of ways, but each one really has their own charm about it. Plus, there are so many more X-Men games that I didn't even mention today. These are just the titles I grew up with, and personally that I'm familiar with. I had a blast playing all these games, and I would recommend checking them out if you can get your hands on them. X-Men 97 has given me so much nostalgia, and I've got the bug, and I honestly need more X-Men. So I thought it'd be fun to make this little video. Hope maybe you learned something new today, or at least found it entertaining. I would love to hear about your favorite X-Men game. Have you been watching X-Men 97? And also, is there any games I missed that you would mention down below that I should check out? I would love to play them. Consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this series and this new format of Who Remembers, focusing on multiple games at once or just a franchise as a whole. Short and sweet video today. Just wanted to give you a little appetizer before these last few episodes of X-Men 97 is served. Until next time, stay blessed, my friends.